everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of the Forever Forward podcast. Uh, this is sort of an interesting episode because, especially in the context of whatever is happening in facilities management, digital transformation, and hard services in the UAE. Almost around the middle of 2021, approximately 18 months back, we did a podcast which is called The State of FM in the Middle East. And there were a few recommendations and predictions that we had done, and said that this is probably what's going to happen across the 12 to 18 months and from the time we published the podcast. And we thought, why not look back at some of them, see what's happened, and also probably a very opportune time to take out the episode on state of FM in UAE in 2023. The reason why we decided to move from Middle East to UAE initially is, right now is obviously when you look at the Middle East GCC broadly, you would see that every other country is in a different maturity state as far as digital transformation or even facilities management as a sector is concerned. So we thought we'll sort of stick to UAE in this particular episode and see what's worked, what's not worked, and what's going to be the future. So firstly, let's look back at some of the top things that we said in the previous edition and perhaps has come true in a very significant way. First, we said that there is going to be a change in a digital stack. Everyone's going to sort of over the next 12 to 18 months, that is in 2021, we said, is going to deploy their own stack. We've seen that almost all of them, the tier 1 FM companies, now have a digital stack as far as their digital strategy is concerned, and that's 100% coverage as far as the tier 1 FM companies are concerned. So that's a welcome move. So you've seen announcements from almost all of them. In a lot of ways, we're going to see the war of dashboards, which is not good, but kind of good. But there's been a fair enough coverage that's happening on the digital front. The only downside, I would say, a lot of people are introducing, CAFM as rebranding or CAFM or reintroducing, which I think is a bummer according to me, because at this stage in the UAE, the adoption of CAFM and stroke CMMS loosely interchangeably used should have been very high by now in itself. If not, then that's a cause of concern, especially from the FM perspective. The second thing, we said that there's going to be segmentation. Some of the companies which are leading are going to establish further niche, and we've seen that. In fact, we can clearly see the top two of the tier 1 FM companies have really gone away from the bloodbath and the race to the bottom, which is what it's called in the FM world. They've stayed away from it. In fact, they've started looking at opportunities where they can leverage the capital that they have, they leverage the capital both in terms of finance and intellectual capacity, and also in terms of the niche that like fundamentally they've been strong in international markets. They're bringing that to the forefront and actually establishing a very strong differentiator there, which is very good. And the third is that there is a widening of the gap between FM players. We said there's going to be a widening of the gap in terms of technology adoption, and we are clearly seeing that as well. Even more when it comes to the overall sort of digital stack. So one is obviously widening in terms of how the leadership is thinking about the business going forward, but also in terms of how you're connecting the dots as far as the digital transformation is concerned. I don't think FM can be a brick or mortar mechanism anymore. IT initiatives need not be confused with digital strategy, and a lot of FM companies in the UAE are kind of confusing their IT initiatives to be digital sort of strategies or initiatives, which I think is only going to come back and hit them hard, not in the long distant, in sort of the medium or short to medium term future in that sense. But what are the recommendations for 2023 are the points that we should be looking out for? One is that I think 2023 to 2024 is going to be a watershed moment from the perspective of digital transformation. I think POCs, largely from FM companies, established FM companies, is going to be a thing of past. I think everyone will have to show real projects, real value, real cost savings, and real digital stack. Like, you cannot just have a reincarnation of a CAFM and CMMS and go back to your customer and say, hey, we have a great product, or just show them dashboards and they'll be convinced. There's so much movement happening that you've got to have something that is differentiated, and that's going to fundamentally happen as far as UAE is concerned. I think the customers would want to see real innovation, not just on the product side, but on the business model side as well. So I think That's something that's going to happen. And my second prediction is kind of connected, that we're going to see wider adoption of vested model or called performance based model, given the fact that there will be a lot of maturity of the industry and in the industry from the digital process perspective and the digital stack perspective. I think that is going to contribute to vested model in my opinion. Thirdly, the gap that we were talking about as far as the facility management companies are concerned, tier one, tier two, or tier three and below, I think that's going to continue to grow wider. As far as the digital stack is concerned, I think the ones who had started earlier, 3, 4 years back, are clearly currently solving for operational challenges, which is how do you solve for things at scale or for scale. As far as the operations is concerned, which is building the capacity across the entire workforce from engineering to technician level to work in a data first environment. That is something that's their focus. I think the ones who started now, I mean, they'll continue to make the same mistakes. It shouldn't happen, but my hunch is they'll continue to make the same mistake, which is actually going to prove very costly. One of the regrets I have and what I've seen as someone who's been very closely working with FM companies, very few FM leaders are actually willing to learn from others or even companies. And again, this also clearly points out the native absence of a playbook which is there at an industry level. No one wants to share that. No one has that. And I think that's a problem, that everyone's kind of doing the same thing, making the same mistake. And I think which is going to be very costly now. So it's if an FM company which is starting now makes the same mistakes, you're in effect going much beyond, much like you're further back than everyone else versus just a couple of years, because by that time the early adopters are actually going to move significantly ahead. Having said that, we are also going to see some early adopters actually struggle, because one of the downsides of actually making a move early is that you start to believe that you've done almost all the things right. So I think there's going to be a bit of shakeup that's going to happen. I think the fourth point I have is largely linked to asset owners. The ones that have large portfolio will eventually make independent moves on the digital front. And when I say digital front, not just on the CMMS perspective, but actually the entire stack, so that they can control in one way or the other the total cost of ownership, the asset performance, sort of management across the life cycle. What it means is there is going to be new business models that would come through. There'll be, in my opinion, joint ventures floated or large projects, long-term projects being handed out with very specific performance criteria, so on and so forth, which ultimately is going to mean that FM companies which are high on capital, both finance and intellect, will actually emerge stronger in those categories. And that's my personal opinion, that we'll see that. Fifth, on the ESG front, I think it's going to continue to make the move. ESG is very strong in the region. In UAE, the government obviously has taken mandates around the targets that they have for sustainability, aligning to net zero or part to net zero. So all of that is going to continue to remain in focus, giving an opportunity for FM companies to be more strategic partner to their customers beyond the mundane stuff that they do in that sense. And I think one last point that I would say that we're going to see in UAE, organizational capacity is going to take center stage, which means FM companies and leaders are going to start to think across the mid to senior level and say, okay, how are we going to reimagine how the leadership or the managerial sort of workforce adapts to an AI first environment? I know this would not have been a conversation 3 to 4 months back, but with the way things are evolving with generative AI and the ease at which applications can be developed, the problems can be solved, we are really going to look at significant changes. Now, when I look at the top half of FM leadership or the middle half of FM leadership, you're thinking a lot of time going into reporting, into aspects which are kind of can be automated and will be automated. Simply look at the kind of amount that is spent across help desk or the team that manages the CMMS, so on and so forth. I think that's very significant. I think that's absolutely going to be a prime candidate to look at whenever everyone is looking at cost optimization. That's just an example. There are so many of them across the entire FM sort of process and function. And at the bottom of the pyramid, which is the most important, is that at technician level, the organizations are going to think, how are we going to reset the skills, and what skills are we going to really impart when we expect them to work in a data first environment, because that's going to be the reality going forward. So I think these are broad six sort of predictions that I have for what I consider is going to be the state of FM in UAE, and eventually it will pan out over the next 12 to 18 months. We'll obviously keep a close eye on the same. And if you have points you think are going to be worth watching out for, do let us know. We'll be more than happy to host you or someone you know who has really valid points across what the industry where the industry is headed to. We would love to host them on the podcast. And again, these are interesting times for the industry, specifically in UAE, where you've had some level of maturity and you're going to have some more level of maturity coming in terms of digital transformation and initiatives. So there couldn't be a more interesting time to be in the industry than now. We are going to watch out how things will pan out. And in the meantime, I'm looking forward to connecting back with you in the next episode. Until then, take care.